Hello and welcome to World of Warcraft Lowdown. My name is Daryl.
And this is Jason, and today we're going to be getting straight into Dev Watercooler, Pruning the Garden of War.
So development on World of Warcraft Warlords of Draenor is progressing well, and we'll soon be ready to enter the first phases of public testing. To help prep you for battle, let's break down some of the upcoming changes we'll make to stats, abilities, and crowd control for the expansion. Stat Squish. Character progression is one of the hallmarks of any role-playing game, and naturally that means we're always adding more power for players to acquire. After multiple expansion and content updates, we've reached a point where the numbers for health, damage, and other stats are so big they're no longer easy for players to grasp. What's more, a lot of power granularity is tied up in tiers of old content, from Molten Core to Dragon Soul, and while it was once necessary for your character's power to spike up suddenly when you hit level 70, that's not the case anymore. In order to bring things down to a more understandable level, we'll be reducing the scale of stats throughout the game and smoothing out these obsolete spikes, so that power scales linearly through questing from levels 1 to 85. This applies to creatures, spells, abilities, consumables, gear, everything. And while that means your numbers for stats and damage are being reduced by a huge amount, the same goes for creatures' health and damage output. For example, a fireball that previously hit a creature for 450,000 out of its 3 million health, 15% of its health, may now hit the same creature for 30,000 out of its 200,000 health, still 15%. It's important to understand that this isn't a nerf, in effect. You'll still be just as powerful, but the numbers that you see will be easier to comprehend. This also won't reduce your ability to solo old content. In fact, to provide some additional peace of mind, we're implementing further scaling of your power against lower level targets, so that earlier content will be even more accessible than it is now. We're also removing all base damage on player spells and abilities and adjusting attack power or spell power scaling as needed, making it so that all specializations will scale at the same rate.
Racial traits. We want races to have fun and interesting perks, but if some of those traits are too powerful, players may feel compelled to play a specific race, even if it's not really the one they want to play. For example, Troll's Berserking ability was extremely powerful, and their Beast Slaying passive was either completely irrelevant or tremendously powerful based on the situation compared to other racial traits. On the other end of the spectrum, many races had few or no performance affecting perks. On top of that, a number of racials that currently grant hit or expertise will soon need replacing, since those stats are being removed in Warlords of Draenor. To keep racials more in line with one another, we decided to bring down the couple high outliers, then establish a fair baseline and bring everyone else up to that. We're accomplishing this by improving old passives, replacing obsolete ones and adding a few new ones where necessary. Ultimately, our goal is to achieve much better parity among races.
Ability Pruning. Over the years we've added significantly more new spells and abilities than we've removed, and the game's complexity has steadily increased. We're to the point now where players are starting to get overwhelmed, sometimes feeling like they need dozens of keybinds, in a few extreme cases, over 100. While the game is loaded with niche abilities that could theoretically be useful in some rare scenario, in reality, many of these are barely used at all, and in some cases the game would simply be better off without them. For Warlords of Draenor, we decided we needed to pare down the number of abilities available to each class and spec in order to remove some of that unnecessary complexity. That means restricting some abilities to certain specs that really need them, instead of being class-wide, and outright removing some other abilities. It also includes removing some spellbook clutter, such as passives that can be merged with other passives or base abilities. This doesn't mean that we want to reduce the depth of gameplay or dumb things down. We still want players to face interesting decisions during combat, and we still want skill to matter, but we can achieve that without the needless complexity in the game now, and we can remove some of the game's more convoluted mechanics while maintaining depth and skill variety.
One type of ability that we focused on removing is temporary power buffs, aka cooldowns. Removing these also helps achieve one of our other goals, which is to reduce the amount of cooldown stacking in the game. In cases where a class or a spec has multiple cooldowns that typically end up getting used together, often in a single macro, we merge them or remove them entirely. The process of determining which spells and abilities to cut or change is a very complex one. We know that every ability feels vital to someone, and we don't want to take this process lightly. Even if we ended up cutting your favourite ability, we hope you understand why we did so in the context of our larger goals for the expansion. Ultimately, the point of these changes is to increase the player's ability to understand the game, not to reduce the gameplay depth.
Crowd control and diminishing returns. One of the big takeaway from Mr. Pandaria is that there is currently simply too much crowd control in the game, especially when it comes to PvP. To address that, we knew that we needed an across-the-board disarmament. Here's a summary of player cast CC changes. Removed silence effects from interrupts. Silence effects still exist, but are never attached to an interrupt.
Removed all disarms.
Reduce the number of diminishing returns categories.
All routes now share the same diminishing returns category.
Exception, routes on charge type abilities have no diminishing returns category, but have a very short duration instead.
All stuns now share the same diminishing returns category.
All incapacitate, sometimes called mesmerize effects, now share the same diminishing returns category and have been merged with the horror diminishing returns category.
Remove the ability to make cast time CC spells, or crowd control, instant with a cooldown.
Remove many crowd control spells entirely and increase the cooldowns and restrictions on others as follows.
Pet cast CC is more limited and in many cases has been removed.
Cyclone can now be dispelled by immunities and master spell.
PvP trinkets now grant immunity to reapplication of an effect from the same spell cast when they break abilities with persistent effects, like Solar Beam.
And long fears are now shorter in PvP due to the added benefit of a fear changing the player's position. Additionally, we've significantly reduced the number of throughput increasing cooldowns and procs in order to further reduce burst damage. Whether your favourite class is losing an ability or taking a hit to its crowd control potential, we hope this discussion helped you better understand why we're making these changes. It's important to remember that other classes will be getting some of their CC removed too. We think this entire package will make exploring Azeroth and PvP a more enjoyable experience for everyone, and we're looking forward to having you try them out when we open up the expansion for testing. In the next Dev Watercooler, we'll explore the changes coming to health and healing in Warlords of Draenor.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the racial traits. I mean, it's going to be cool to see them do something completely different. I mean, the racial traits did attach some players to some races due to, with the human, they got the free trinket with their every man for himself, and like it says already in the blog, the troll had the DPS increase. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with removing them or changing them to, you know, make people choose different characters instead of all the racial traits.
I'm definitely interested to see what spells they add and remove as well, in terms of like trying to clear up the spellbook clutter, and again the PvP additions and taking away some of the crowd controls, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. It saves like getting feared all the time into
Yeah.
one area for a long duration, and then what they were able to do was, because a stun or a freeze was a completely different CC that had a brand new sort of, you know, it wasn't affected by the diminishing returns, yeah, so they could fear you and then stun you for another 6 seconds or so. Rogues had a wonderful time with that.
Some were just terribly overpowered, and I'm glad they're actually addressing that now.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Alright guys, thank you very much for watching this video. This is Daryl.
And this is Jason signing off, and join us next time for another installment of World of Warcraft Lowdown.